Hi, everybody. This is just such an amazing retreat. I am just really enjoying it so much. Um, and thank you, Jane, for your attachment talk. Are there any questions?
I'll comment on something. Can you hear me? Since nobody wants to ask me a question. All right, it's Ting, and look like I'm attached to my mask on this retreat. And the Master Song also said it's actually more important to practice like sitting a retreat, so you become more and more aware of your attachment. That's more important than getting enlightenment. Can you comment on that?
What kind of comment would you want?
It's
Yeah, so
all.
you can't get enlightenment. I mean, getting enlightenment is a problem in language. First, enlightenment is a problem in translation. The word actually means awakening. So either you're awake or you're asleep, or in some kind of intermediate fugue state, right? So you can't get enlightenment. You can wake up. And practice is a very good way to wake up. So the stories about waking up are very interesting. It never happens. You never hear a story where somebody is sitting and practicing, and while they are practicing, they suddenly wake up. It never happens like that. What happens is you practice and you practice and you practice, and then you're like walking down the street and you see, well, you hear a bell sound maybe, and that hearing that bell sound, you wake up. Or maybe you're in the kitchen and you're cutting vegetables or something and you look up and you see an insect, and suddenly you wake up seeing that insect. So it's like, it's a reason we call it practice. So one of the members of our Zen Center is a violinist, Natalie, and she was telling me how she said, you practice, and then when you play, the music plays itself. And that's a fantastic metaphor. So we practice very hard. Just like you're practicing the violin, or in my case, you're practicing the piano. It's very technical, and you're trying these things and doing these things. And then when it's time to play, then the music can play itself. So we practice, and as Jane said, part of our practice is seeing our attachments, seeing our thinking, seeing our ideas, seeing our likes, seeing our dislikes, seeing these things come up and looking at them. And what is your substance? What are you made of? What is your substance? And then gradually they kind of lose their hold, you know? So that's part of our practice. And then this universe can come through us. We're not separate from this universe. But not separate from this universe does not mean sitting there saying, ah, I am not separate from this universe. I am one with the universe. No, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean attaining a state of samadhi or something. It means simply that everything flows, you flow, everything just not separate. Just your actions, closed time closed, open time open, happy time happy, sad time sad, just everything just flowing and moving and not separate. Okay? Does that answer your question? Okay.
I
Are
have a
there,
question.
sure.
Um, okay, so it's not get enlightenment, it's waking up, but is it, it sounds like somebody was walking down the street and heard a bell ring and they woke up.
Mm-hmm.
Does that, but my vision is that this person like wakes up forever and never falls back asleep and is forever awake and and is changed for having woken up is but do we kind of wake up and then sort of go back and then wake up and then is it something that happens like over and over, or once?
Well, over and 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 over. So these moments when you're just completely open, what we call don't know mind. You're just not caught in any of your ideas, any of your patterns. We have those moments over and over again. Barbara Rhodes, who's the head Zen master of our international school, I heard her say once that everyone attains enlightenment 500 times a day. And then decades later, I mentioned this to her and she said, I said that? It's a good metaphor because, yeah, we wake up over and over and over and over. We just have to allow ourselves to do it. And sometimes we can be awake for a long time and sometimes we can wake for a short time. Don't check it. Now, oh, so wonderful. I have been awake for the last 10 hours. Then you're not awake if you're doing that, right? Because you're checking. So, yeah, so just don't worry about it. Just cultivate, practice. The idea of one and done, that's somebody's idea. The idea that you attain some state and you stay in that state forever and ever, how can this be? Everything's constantly changing. So how could you attain some state and then remain in it forever? Because your circumstances are changing, everything's changing around you, and you are changing with that. So it's nothing to hold on to. A long time ago, and I know I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. When I was first starting to practice and I was out in California and Zen Master Sungsan was out there too. And Diana Lynch had this little tiny nascent baby infant Zen group up in her house in the hills with her husband Ezra. And Zen Master Sungsan was staying there and I was staying there too over a summer. He was just there for a few weeks. And someone called, this young man called and said, I want to meet with the Zen master because I went to Japan and I attained enlightenment and I have a certificate of enlightenment and I would like him to certify my enlightenment. And so he told Diana to tell him, yes, of course you can come at this particular time, And then Diana hung up the phone and he said, oh, those are the worst. Because, that guy, he had this experience and then he's holding on to this experience. It's no different from somebody I knew once who used to be a member of our Zen Center a very, very long time ago. And the reason he was practicing was because he once had an acid trip in which he had this amazing experience and he wanted to experience it again. So he thought that Zen was the way to experience this acid trip again, which I certainly hope not. So it's this idea that there's something to have and something to hold on to that's very problematic. Just live your life moment to moment to moment. And don't check, am I awake? Am I asleep? Am I half awake? Am I half asleep? Don't check. Just do it. Just live your life. But practice, because as you practice, your center becomes stronger, your heart becomes more open, your mind becomes more clear. So that's what's important, is how you live your life. And what label you give to the state of your mind, that is not important. Okay? Thank you. And I know Liz has a question.
Yes, I have a question in an effort to cut my attachment. This is my question, and it has to do with some of the stuff that we talked about earlier in the interview. But okay, so I get really mixed up with the before thinking, and just some other interviews, not just everything in the practice. So it isn't anything that anybody has told me exactly the way I'm going to explain it, but it's what I've pieced together, which I'm sure is wrong, but you can let me know. So, what my impression is that, this awakening, whether you call it the one clear thing, which is not a thing, but the awakening whatever label you want to put on it, is this before speech, before thought, and that like in a Kangan interview or even in a situation, then if it comes from that spot of before speech or before thought, that's the place where it needs to come from, and that's clear. And it just, that doesn't really make sense to me. And then if you think of it as all is one, well, what about the rocks and the pieces of the leaves that I was talking about earlier? What, I mean, they don't have the same experience that we do. I don't have the same experience as a rock. Well, maybe sometimes, but not really. So I don't know, that before speech and before thinking, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. So first of all, you don't have the same experience as a rock. Do your fingers have the same experience as your toes? Okay. There you go. All right. They're Liz's fingers, they're Liz's toes. They don't have the same experience. So this world is like that. So you and the rock are not separate. Doesn't mean that you have the same experiences. Liz has Liz's experiences. The rock has the rock's experiences, whatever it means to say a rock has experiences, but still not separate, just as your fingers and your toes are not separate. I guess I should pick up my foot, your fingers, and then imagine this is a foot, and your toes are not separate. So before does not mean before in time. And I think that might be where it's a little, if you think it means before in time, so before speech, before thinking, you think it means in the moment before you speak, in the moment before you think. But it's instead what it means is more fundamental than. So the speech and the thought are the surface. And where do they come from? That's much more fundamental. There's like a fundamental ground of being, in a certain sense, to use a phrase from a different tradition. So it's like a fundamental ground of being. And that's what before speech, before thinking, it means more fundamental than speech and thinking. And if you've ever interacted with a baby or an animal, you know what I mean. Like you look at a baby, you can play with a baby, you can, make faces at a baby and the baby will make faces back at you. You can look into a baby's eyes, a baby will look into your eyes. You can do all these things. But the baby, if it's small enough, it doesn't have speech and it doesn't have thought in the way we have thought because it doesn't have speech, So this infant mind, and there's this Blake poem, I have no name, I am but 2 days old, what shall I call thee? Something, something joy is thy name, sweet joy befall thee. Okay, anyway, that's a little sentimental. But this infant mind, this newborn mind, that's what we're talking about. It's the thing that's more fundamental. It's more fundamental than speech. It's more fundamental than thinking. And if you have a dog, I don't know, cats don't like to communicate with people that much, but if you have a dog, and you can look at the dog and the dog will look at you very soulfully sometimes, right? And you're looking at the dog and the dog is looking at you, but the dog doesn't have the kind of thinking that we have, and it certainly doesn't have speech in the way that we have speech. So, and yet there's this mind-to-mind communication in a way. If you try to put words to it, if you become very sentimental and you talk about how the dog loves you, well, I don't know what that means because I'm not a dog. So I don't know how a dog perceives of the relationship, but there is a relationship there. There is something there. So this mind that you have and this mind that the dog has, and they're communicating. And because we're verbal, we immediately distort it into human type stuff. But still there's a communication that's going on there. or people who ride horses. I don't ride a horse, but I know that people who ride horses and are close to horses, they really care about their horses. There's a communication. It's not even eye to eye. It's like, you're sitting on the horse and just the slightest move of your legs and the horse will know what to do. There's this communication, almost like one being, if you're really attentive to each other. So it's that level that we're talking about, that level that's much more fundamental than speech and much more fundamental than thinking. Okay?
Yes, but.
You're so good with the yes buts. I love it.
So yes, so now okay, cut through the human realm, okay, because now it's all living. It's all living things. It's not what we would consider innate objects like this cabinet that my computer.
Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
So I think this is Ting here.
Mhm.
Many years ago, we did a lot of different rounds of Compass of Zen
Mhm.
classes. I remember we reached somewhere. I couldn't remember which part, but I went through all those classes many years ago. Every year you took a year or something to finish this book. But every time you did it, you ask around the
Mhm.
whole, ask everybody share some experiences that they could express that that's something that it's kind of, how do you say? I mean, when you wanted to say before thinking or after speech, don't know mine, it's just a concept. So I think it's just become another idea, right? So I remember in those classes, and then almost everybody in those classes had shared some wonderful experience, and it's almost all coming from before they practice.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about that, if I may. So first of all, we'll probably have another Compass of Zen class starting in the fall. The last one finished in last May, and so we want to give it a little bit of time, and then we'll have another one starting. So Compass of Zen is Zen Master Sung San's book that sort of his description of the Theravada, which he unfortunately calls Hinayana. So Theravada is the Buddhism of Southeast Asia. And Hinayana, it means lesser vehicle because the next one he talks about is Mahayana, which means greater vehicle. So the Mahayana people called the Theravada Hinayana, which is, propaganda, right? Anyway, so Theravada, Mahayana, and then Zen comes out of Mahayana. So he talks about those three, the Theravada Buddhism, Southeast Asian Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, which comes from India to China to Korea to Japan, and also from China to Vietnam. And then Zen is a part of the Mahayana, but it's the part we practice. So then he talks about Zen. And it's a wonderful book if you want to get a slightly biased, but really pretty complete overview of the parts of Zen that are not Tibetan. He didn't talk about Tibetan because it doesn't lead to Zen. It's another place. So he didn't talk about that. It's a pretty good overview. And so we have these classes, and the old version took 18 classes or 17 classes, and now we've got a version that it's 5 or 6 classes. And the way we do those classes is instead of me or Stanley yapping, instead we go around in a circle, and what people are asked is for whatever the reading was, what struck you? What did you say? Oh, this is interesting, or confusing, or whatever. And then what questions do you have? And we go around in a circle. And the wisdom of the Sangha is that by the time it gets around to me, almost always everyone has said, or someone has said, well, anything I wanted to say, someone has said, and furthermore, people have said things that I would never have thought to say. So it's really wonderful. And then I basically address the questions and the issues that came up. And then we have another go round where people can then comment more freely, like back and forth, rather than going around in a circle. And the class that Ting is referring to is one of the chapters is on enlightenment. And so for that particular chapter, I always ask, do you have an enlightenment experience, an awakening experience? And there's only one person, and all the times we've done it, and we've done it like 6 or 7 times. So probably we've had about 50 or 60 people, maybe more, go through the course. There's only one person who ever said, no, I have never had this kind of experience. And none of the people have ever had this kind of experience. Their first experience was always before they started practicing Zen. That's what Ting is talking about. So this awakening is available to everybody. But then the question is, how do you use it? So for most people, they have this experience, and it's a very strong experience, but then they don't have the tools to use it. They don't know how to use it in their life. So it's just sitting there like a mountain in their life that they can look at and say, wow, that was really great. That was really beautiful. That was really wonderful. But then using it in their life and then practicing Zen, then they begin to learn how to use it to help this world. So that's what Ting is talking about. So as like, Bobby Rhodes said, everybody wakes up 500 times a day. We usually don't notice it, but boop, 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 boop. We just wake up 500 times a day. But then how do we use that waking up? How do we use everything? Even our most terrible experiences, how do you use those experiences to help this world? That's the real question. It's not what kind of state you've attained. It's how do you use your life? What is the direction of your life? That's what's important. Thank you for your question. And as I said, sometime in the fall, we'll be starting another round of Compass of Zen. What we usually do is these days we do 1 or 2 of these like once a month, and then we do something else, and then we do another 1 or 2, so like that. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay.
Okay, so you said that we have like 500 awakenings in a day, but we don't notice them. So
Yeah.
how can we notice them more?
Don't worry about noticing them.
Well, what good are they if you can't notice them?
How do you use them? How do you use it? Do you shut down? How do you use it? Can you keep awake?
Maybe an example?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I'll tell you an example from my early practice. I was sitting on the back porch of the Cambridge Zen Center when it was in Allston, Massachusetts, and on a retreat. And suddenly I saw this tree. I just saw this tree, like Buddha seeing the star. I saw this tree. I was so excited. Like I'd never seen anything before. I mean, I actually had, but, didn't have a context. So I saw this tree and I was so excited. And I wrote a little poem and I showed it to Zen Master Sung-san, my enlightenment poem. And he just, So I didn't know how to like, I was so excited about seeing the tree that it got in the way of seeing the tree. I saw this tree, and then I was so excited that I saw the tree that all I could think of was how I saw the tree, and then it was, then I was in what I thought was this wonderful state, but it was gone because I was so impressed with how wonderful I was for seeing this tree, And another time in Berkeley, there was a sunset, at that point, the Berkeley Zen Center well, it's called Empty Gate Zen Center. Berkeley Zen Center is a Soto Center. The Empty Gate Zen Center was on a hill, and you could, see over the bay a little bit. And there was a sunset, and I saw the sunset, and I wrote another poem. And I showed it to him, and he goes like, like that. Because what happened was I was so excited that I saw the sunset, which meant I was no longer seeing the sunset, And then another time I was in my kitchen after a retreat, and I saw this fly. And I said this recently at Dharma Talk. Flies are beautiful. I mean, they have these iridescent wings and everything like that. They're really beautiful. And I saw this fly, and I was so excited that I saw this fly, which means I stopped seeing the fly. Because all I saw is how excited I was, how wonderful it was to see the fly. So then by that point, I wasn't seeing the fly. So, if we check ourselves, if we're, am I awake, then we're asleep. The very act of checking if I'm awake means I'm asleep. It's like Natalie says about, the difference between practicing and playing music. So when you're playing, you're not checking. It's just coming through you. It's just flowing through you. And you're not checking. And you're not going like, this was really great or this was really terrible. When I'm practicing piano and I start thinking, oh, this is really great, that's when I'm going to make a mistake, invariably. As soon as I start saying, oh, wow, you've really got this, Judy, boom, it's gone. So it's that mind that's not checking, our idea of ourself and how we're relating to this world is not getting in the way. The music is playing us. The tree is just there. The sunset is just there. The fly is just there. And I'll tell you another story. So one time I was very early on, I was the head Dharma teacher, Jane's job on this retreat. I was the head Dharma teacher on a retreat in Lawrence. And we were at 1115 Ohio, which was the first communal. We actually had a communal Zen center. We had like people living there. There were like 6 adults and 2 babies, 2 toddlers. And me and Stan and Dennis and Dae Kwangson, all of whom became teachers. 3 of them are Zen masters, and then 2 other people. And and I tended, when I was new at this, I tended to be very strict and judgmental on retreats, and there was this one guy who had slept through lunch. And ordinarily, I'd be very judgmental. Oh, you slept through lunch. No lunch for you. But for some reason, he staggered out of bed, like, after lunch was over. And it was clear that, like, he was just so foggy and so out of it. And so I immediately said, would you like something to eat? That was waking up. That was right there. That's what that guy needed. He needed somebody to reach out instead of saying, you've slept through lunch, this is terrible. He needed somebody to reach out and say, would you like something to eat? And then he just kind of, you could see him relax and, yeah, can I have something to eat? And so I warmed something up for him and gave it to him. That's correct function. So that's much more important than these moments of, the things that we label as moments of awakening. That's really being awake. That's functioning in this world, Okay?
Yes, thank you. That was great.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay doesn't mean a judgment. It just means, did I answer your question? So, okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? We've got a little bit of time.
Okay.
Oh, Kyle has a question.
Who?
Kyle, I think, has a question. Do you have a question, Kyle? He's trying to unmute himself or something. Yeah.
Okay. What does Kwanzaa Bosal mean?
Oh, Kwanzaa Bosal. Kwanzaa Bosal is the bodhisattva of compassion, and it literally means perceive, Kwan, world, say, sound, And then Bosal means bodhisattva. So this is the bodhisattva that perceives the sounds of the world. And if you perceive the sounds of the world, you perceive the world's suffering. And then compassion awakens. So you perceive the sounds of suffering. You perceive suffering without judging it, without checking it. You just simply perceive the suffering, and then you can reach out to help, if indeed that is appropriate. Okay, so that's Kwanzaa Bosal, and Kwanzaa Bosal is sometimes portrayed as having 1,000 hands, 1,000 arms, 1,000 hands, and in each hand is an eye. So that very first chant we do at 6:30 at night, that is the 1,000 Eyes and Hands Sutra. So that is a sutra devoted, dedicated to, focused on Kwanzaa Bosal, 1,000 eyes and hands. Those are the 1,000 eyes and hands of Kwanzaa Bosal. I guess Kwanzaa Bosal actually has 1,002 eyes because you still have those 2 eyes, right? And Kwanzaa Bosal is in Northeast Asian iconography is always portrayed as somewhat more feminine than so all the bodhisattvas are portrayed as somewhat androgynous. Like you notice they don't have muscles. If you look at, they never have muscles, and they sort of have this androgyny, but they'll also have these very thin mustaches, just so you know they're really guys. Kwanzaa Bosal is often referred to with feminine pronouns. So Kwanzaa Bosal is, and Kwanzaa Bosal in Indian Buddhism, the early Indian Buddhism, is the male Avalokiteshvara. So in the Heart Sutra, we say Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva when practicing deeply. So that's also Kwanzaa Bosal. Kuan Yin is the Chinese. So Kuan Yin is the perceived sound, and there's actually, is it Kwanzaa Yin? I don't know, but there's another word in there if you have the full name, which means the same thing, perceived world sound. In Japanese, it's Kanon or Kanzeon. And Tibetan, I forget what the name is in Tibetan, but this is a very important bodhisattva. This is the bodhisattva of compassion. So our first chant at 6:30 is a very long chant, which is very much dedicated to Kwanzaa Bosal. And then we do Kwanzaa Bosal chanting directly after that. And then we have the homage to the 3 jewels. And then we have the Heart Sutra, which begins with Avalokiteshvara, Kwanzaa Bosal again. And then we have the Great Dharani, which is again about Kwanzaa Bosal. And our school is Kwan School of Zen, Kuan Yin. So again, compassion, the bodhisattva of compassion is extremely important. That's the bodhisattva that, our school sort of focuses on, just as other schools of Zen, like Shin Buddhism, focuses on Amida Buddha, the Buddha of the Western Pure Land, and we tend to focus on Kwanzaa Bosal. And we are Kwanzaa Bosal. When you're chanting Kwanzaa Bosal, Kwanzaa Bosal, Kwanzaa Bosal, Kwanzaa Bosal, when you're doing that, you're not asking for any favors. I mean, we do, like not on retreats, but the rest of the time we do announce names of people we're chanting for, But we're not really petitioning Kwanzaa Bosal. We're focusing our energy to become Kwanzaa Bosal. We want Kwanzaa Bosal to flow through us, become Kwanzaa Bosal. So it's Namu, which means homage to, but it also means become one. So it's homage to because you're becoming one with that. So Kwanzaa Bosal is very, very important in our school, and in all of Zen, Son, Tien, Chan. Kwanzaa Bosal, Avalokiteshvara, is the main bodhisattva. In Japan also they're very big on Jijang Bosal, Jizo, but we tend to focus mostly on Kwanzaa Bosal. Okay? So you become Kwanzaa Bosal, all right? Deal? Okay, Brandon.
Hey, so I vaguely remember from a few of the Sunday services that I attended months ago that somebody was saying when we chant Kwanzaa Bosal that we're not chanting for ourselves, but we chant for other people.
Mhm.
And so I guess my question is that, I've learned through various sources that to have compassion for others, we first have to have compassion for ourselves. And so how does that tie in with we're chanting Kwanzaa Bosal for other people?
So Kwanzaa, not chanting Kwanzaa Bosa for ourselves means we're not petitioning. We're not saying, make me rich or make me healthy, or, make my wife love me, make my child go to Harvard. Although, I mean, actually, I know people who will do Buddhist chanting to like help their kid go to Harvard, whatever. But also, compassion for yourself and compassion for others are not separate. So this idea, first you have compassion for yourself, then you have compassion for others, I think that that's somewhat of a misstatement. What they're really saying is, if you are down on yourself, if you are always telling yourself how terrible you are, if you can't break through your own suffering, then you can't help other people out of their suffering. So it's not like first you have compassion for yourself and then you have compassion for others. They come together. Like, why should you have compassion for yourself? So that you can help others. So already it's together. Already it's not separate. So yeah, compassion for yourself, compassion for others, both. It's not different. But it's not like, oh, I'm not going to have compassion for you. First I have to have compassion for myself, then I can look at you. It's not like that. It comes together. It comes at the same time. And you just completely, when you're chanting, you're just completely chanting. You're not even thinking, I am chanting for compassion. The thing about compassion is if you think of it as a state of mind, then it's already a block. You already have an obstacle because you have this idea of compassion. Compassion is how you act. Like when I asked that guy, like, are you hungry? Would you like some food? That's compassion. It doesn't matter what I was feeling at the time. What's important is that I reached out. So the mind that is open to reaching out, that's the mind of compassion. And whether it feels compassionate or not doesn't matter. If you're open to reaching out, then you're compassionate. Okay, and that includes open to not beating up on yourself, you stop doing that, just like you're just open. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Let's see, we have time for one more question before we begin sitting again.
I have a question. It
Okay.
has to. You had said that the Great Dharani was about Kwanzaa Bosal.
Yeah.
I thought that Dharani didn't have any words or didn't
Yeah.
have any. Didn't have. So how would anybody know that that's what it's about?
So the Great Dharani, that's fourth chant. Yeah, it's a very long mantra. Dharani means a very long mantra. And mantras, by definition, almost by definition, don't have translations. And the reason I say almost by definition is because gate, parasam gate, bodhisattva, that does translate gone, beyond, gone completely beyond. Hooray! That's what that at the end of the Heart Sutra. And so occasionally you run into a mantra that has a meaning, but usually they don't have meanings. And so yeah, on the one hand, it doesn't have a meaning. On the other hand, it's like everybody knows. It's sometimes called the Great Compassionate Dharani. So everybody knows that this Dharani is focused on Kuan Yin, on Avalokiteshvara. Everybody knows that. It's just part of the tradition. Okay? Okay.